Captain Sarah Mitchell adjusted her flight helmet as she walked across the dusty airfield at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. The morning sun cast long shadows between the rows of military aircraft, but her eyes were fixed on the massive A-10 Thunderbolt II sitting on the tarmac. The Warthog, as pilots called it, was not the prettiest aircraft in the Air Force fleet, but it was built for one purpose: close air support and ground attack missions. Sarah had been flying A-10s for 3 years, but today felt different. Word had spread through the base that a new pilot was arriving, someone with a reputation for being difficult and challenging to work with. Major Jake Reynolds was transferring from another base, and the stories that followed him were not pleasant ones. He had a habit of questioning female pilots' abilities and making their lives miserable during training exercises. As Sarah performed her pre-flight inspection, checking every bolt and panel on her aircraft, she noticed a tall figure approaching from the operations building. The man wore a flight suit with Major's insignia and carried himself with an arrogance that was visible even from a distance. His swagger told her everything she needed to know about who he was before he even spoke. "You must be Mitchell," he said, stopping a few feet away from her aircraft. His voice carried a tone of skepticism that immediately put Sarah on edge. "I've heard about you. They say you're pretty good for a female pilot." The way he emphasized the word female made it clear that he did not consider it a compliment. Sarah continued her inspection without looking up. She had dealt with men like Jake before, and she knew the best response was to let her flying do the talking. "Major Reynolds, I assume," she replied calmly, running her hand along the wing surface to check for any damage or loose rivets. Jake crossed his arms and watched her work with a smirk on his face. "I've been flying combat missions for 8 years, Mitchell. I've seen plenty of pilots come and go, and I can tell you right now that this job requires more than just book knowledge and simulator time. When the bullets start flying and lives are on the line, you need someone with real steel in their veins." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah finally looked up from her inspection, meeting his gaze with steady brown eyes. She had worked too hard and overcome too many obstacles to let someone like Jake intimidate her. "With respect, Major, my record speaks for itself. I've completed 47 successful combat missions with 0 friendly fire incidents and a perfect safety record." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Records are just numbers on paper, Captain. What matters is how you perform when everything goes wrong, and your wingman's life depends on your decisions. I've seen plenty of pilots who looked good on paper but froze up when things got real." Other pilots and ground crew members were starting to notice the conversation, and Sarah could feel their eyes on her. She knew that how she handled this moment would set the tone for her relationship with Jake and potentially affect how the other pilots viewed her. The military was still very much a male-dominated world, and she had learned that showing any sign of weakness or backing down would only invite more challenges. "If you have concerns about my abilities, Major, I suggest you take them up with Colonel Harrison," Sarah said, referring to their commanding officer. "He's the one who assigns missions and determines pilot readiness." Jake stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. "Oh, I don't need to talk to the colonel about this. I have a better idea. How about we settle this in the air? A little friendly competition to see what you're really made of." Sarah's pulse quickened, but not from fear. She had been flying since she was 16 years old, starting with small civilian aircraft before joining the Air Force. She had graduated at the top of her class from pilot training and had earned her spot flying the A-10 through skill and determination, not favoritism. If Jake wanted to test her abilities, she was more than ready to show him what she could do. "What kind of competition?" she asked, her voice remaining steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flow through her system. Jake's smirk widened. "Close air support exercise. We'll both take our birds up and run some attack scenarios on the practice range. Whoever performs better gets bragging rights and respect. Loser has to publicly admit they were wrong about their abilities." The challenge hung in the air between them like electricity before a thunderstorm. Sarah knew that accepting could be seen as unprofessional, but backing down would be worse. She had worked too hard to earn her place among the elite A-10 pilots to let someone question her skills without proving them wrong. "You're on, Major," she said, extending her hand for a shake. "When do you want to do this?" Jake shook her hand with a grip that was harder than necessary. "This afternoon. We'll file it as a routine training exercise. May the best pilot win." As Jake walked away, Sarah turned back to her aircraft with renewed determination. She had faced discrimination and doubt throughout her military career, but she had never let it stop her from pursuing her dreams. Today would be no different. She would show Jake Reynolds and anyone else who doubted her that she belonged in the cockpit of the most fearsome ground attack aircraft in the world. News of the challenge spread through the base faster than wildfire. By lunchtime, every pilot, mechanic, and support crew member knew about the afternoon showdown between Captain Mitchell and Major Reynolds. The betting pool started immediately, with most of the money surprisingly going toward Sarah despite Jake's reputation and experience. Sarah spent her lunch break in the squadron's briefing room, studying tactical maps and reviewing attack procedures. She had flown hundreds of training missions on the practice range, but today every maneuver would be scrutinized and judged. The A-10's primary weapon, the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, could fire 3,900 rounds per minute of depleted uranium shells capable of destroying tanks and armored vehicles. Accuracy and precision were everything in close air support missions. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the senior maintenance chief, found Sarah reviewing her notes. He was a veteran mechanic who had worked on A-10s for over 20 years and had seen countless pilots come and go. "Captain, I wanted you to know that your bird is in perfect condition. I personally checked every system twice this morning." Sarah looked up, surprised by the gesture. Rodriguez was known for being strictly professional and rarely showed favoritism toward any pilot. "Thank you, Sergeant. I appreciate that. Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying so, Major Reynolds has a reputation for playing dirty. He's been known to find ways to give himself advantages in these kinds of competitions. You might want to watch out for that." The warning was delivered in a casual tone, but Sarah understood the significance. In the military, senior enlisted personnel like Rodriguez had seen everything, and their advice was usually worth heeding. What kind of advantages? Rodriguez glanced around to make sure they were alone. Let's just say he's very good at finding technicalities and exploiting rules that haven't been specifically spelled out. He once won a competition by arguing that his opponent violated a regulation that nobody even knew existed. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. She had suspected that Jake was the type to look for any edge he could find, fair or not. "Thanks for the heads up, Sergeant. I'll keep that in mind." As the afternoon approached, Sarah made her way to the operations center to file her flight plan and receive the mission briefing. The practice range was located 30 miles from the base and contained various targets designed to simulate enemy positions and vehicles. The exercise would test multiple skills including target acquisition, accuracy, communication with ground controllers, and tactical decision-making. Colonel Harrison, the squadron commander, was waiting in the briefing room along with Jake and several other pilots who would observe the exercise. Harrison was a fair but demanding leader who had flown A-10s in Desert Storm and understood the aircraft's capabilities better than anyone. "Gentlemen and lady," Harrison began, "this afternoon's exercise will be conducted as a standard close air support training mission. Each pilot will engage a series of targets on the practice range while being evaluated on accuracy, efficiency, and adherence to safety procedures. The scoring will be based on target destruction percentage, ammunition conservation, and overall tactical execution." Jake raised his hand. "Sir, will there be any time limits or specific attack patterns required?" "Good question, Major. Each pilot will have 30 minutes to engage all designated targets. You're free to choose your own attack routes and tactics, but you must follow standard radio protocols and safety procedures at all times." Sarah studied the target layout on the tactical display. The range contained 12 different targets including simulated enemy vehicles, bunkers, and personnel positions. Some targets would require precision strikes with the cannon, while others might be better suited for the A-10 secondary weapon systems. "The exercise will begin at 1500 hours, Harrison continued. "Captain Mitchell will go first, followed by Major Reynolds. Both flights will be recorded and analyzed by our weapon systems officers. Any questions?" Sarah had no questions about the mission parameters, but she was curious about one thing. "Sir, who will be doing the evaluation and scoring?" "Fair question, Captain. I'll be personally overseeing the evaluation, along with Major Thompson from Weapon Systems. We'll have complete telemetry data from both aircraft as well as video footage from the range cameras." Jake seemed satisfied with the arrangements, which made Sarah slightly suspicious. She remembered Rodriguez's warning about technicalities and wondered what angle Jake might be planning to exploit. After the briefing, Sarah returned to her aircraft for final preparations. The ground crew had already loaded the A-10 with training ammunition for the GAU-8 cannon and performed all pre-flight checks. The massive aircraft sat ready for combat. its twin engines and distinctive straight wings giving it an intimidating presence on the flight line. As Sarah performed her walk-around inspection, she noticed Jake talking quietly with one of the weapons systems officers near the operations building. Their conversation seemed more intense than casual, and she wondered what they might be discussing. Rodriguez's warning echoed in her mind as she continued her checks. The time for speculation was over. In less than an hour, Sarah would be in the cockpit of her A-10, flying a mission that would either prove her worth or provide ammunition for every doubter who questioned whether women belonged in combat aircraft. She had trained for this moment her entire career, and she was ready to show everyone exactly what Captain Sarah Mitchell could do when she unleashed the full power of the Warthog. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains as Sarah climbed into her cockpit and began the startup sequence. The twin General Electric engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, and the aircraft systems came online one by one. Soon she would be airborne and the real test would begin. The cockpit of the A-10 Thunderbolt II was Sarah's second home. Every switch, display, and control was positioned exactly where her hands expected to find them after thousands of hours of training in combat missions. As she ran through the pre-takeoff checklist, the familiar routine calmed her nerves and focused her mind on the task ahead. Tower, Hawkeye 1 requesting permission for takeoff, Sarah called over the radio, using her designated call sign for the exercise. Hawkeye 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Runway 27. Good hunting, Captain. Sarah advanced the throttles and the two General Electric turbofan engines responded with increasing power. The A-10 was not built for speed like fighter jets, but its engines provided reliable thrust and exceptional fuel efficiency for extended loitering over the battlefield. As the aircraft gathered momentum down the runway, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of the nose wheel lifting off the ground, followed by the main gear as the Warthog took flight. The practice range was a short flight from the base, giving Sarah time to test all her aircraft systems and mentally rehearse her attack plan. She had decided to approach the target systematically, starting with the most difficult shots and working her way through the easier ones. This strategy would allow her to tackle the challenging targets while her ammunition supply was at maximum, and her focus was sharpest. Range control, this is Hawkeye 1 approaching the target area. Request permission to begin exercise. Hawkeye 1, range control. You are cleared hot. All targets are active. Begin your run when ready. Sarah banked the A-10 into a wide circle around the practice range, studying the target layout from above. The simulated enemy positions were spread across several square miles of desert terrain, designed to replicate the kind of battlefield scenarios she might encounter in real combat. Some targets were stationary vehicles and bunkers, while others were moving remote-controlled targets that would test her ability to track and engage dynamic threats. She selected her first target, a simulated tank positioned behind a low ridge that would require a precise angle of attack. The A-10's GAU-8 cannon was devastating against armored vehicles, but only if the depleted uranium round struck at the correct angle to penetrate the armor. Sarah rolled into a shallow dive, lining up her approach while monitoring her airspeed and altitude. The targeting system locked onto the simulated tank, and Sarah squeezed the trigger. The massive cannon erupted with a sound like thunder, sending a stream of 30mm rounds toward the target. The recoil from the gun was so powerful that it actually slowed the aircraft slightly, requiring Sarah to adjust her throttle to maintain proper approach speed. Direct hit on target Alpha, came the confirmation from range control. Target destroyed. Sarah smiled grimly and immediately turned toward her second target. The exercise was being timed and every second counted toward her overall score. She had practiced these maneuvers hundreds of times, but the pressure of competition added an element that training could never fully replicate. The second target was a simulated surface-to-air missile site that needed to be eliminated quickly to prevent it from threatening friendly aircraft. Sarah approached from a different angle, using the A-10's ability to make tight turns and rapid course corrections. The aircraft handled like a truck compared to sleek fighters, but it was incredibly stable and forgiving, allowing pilots to make aggressive maneuvers at low altitudes. Another burst from the cannon, another direct hit. Sarah was finding her rhythm now, moving from target to target with increasing confidence. The A-10 responded to her commands like an extension of her own body, rolling and diving with precision as she engaged each simulated enemy position. The fourth target presented a new challenge, a moving vehicle that was following an unpredictable path across the desert floor. Sarah had to lead the target, calculating where it would be by the time her rounds reached the impact point. She waited for the right moment, then triggered a longer burst that caught the remote-controlled vehicle squarely in its center mass. "Excellent shot, Hawkeye 1, range control reported. That's 4 for 4 so far." As Sarah continued through the target sequence, she became aware that she was flying better than she ever had before. The combination of competition pressure and her desire to prove herself was bringing out the best in her piloting skills. Every maneuver was smooth and precise, every shot carefully calculated and executed. The A-10's cannon held 1,174 rounds of ammunition, and Sarah was being careful to conserve her supply while still ensuring target destruction. Ammunition management was a crucial part of the scoring system, as real combat missions often required pilots to engage multiple targets with limited supplies. Target after target fell to her precise gunnery. Sarah used the aircraft's secondary weapons for some targets, demonstrating her familiarity with all of the A-10's combat systems. The Maverick missiles were particularly effective against the hardened bunker targets, while the cannon remained her weapon of choice for vehicles and personnel positions. With 15 minutes remaining in her allotted time, Sarah had successfully engaged 10 of the 12 targets. The remaining 2 were positioned in a way that would require a challenging approach through a simulated valley where surface-to-air threats would normally be a concern. This was exactly the kind of scenario that separated good pilots from exceptional ones. Sarah dove the A-10 toward the valley floor, using the terrain to mask her approach. The aircraft's armored cockpit and redundant systems were designed to survive ground fire, but in training exercises, points were deducted for exposing the aircraft to unnecessary risk. She had to balance aggression with tactical smart thinking. The 11th target was a command post hidden in a cave-like structure. Sarah approached at an extremely low altitude, pulling up at the last second to deliver her attack. The cannon rounds found their mark and the target was destroyed. 1 target remaining and still 8 minutes left on the clock. The final target was the most challenging of all, a mobile radar unit that was actively moving and would only be visible for brief moments as it emerged from behind cover. Sarah circled overhead, waiting for her opportunity while carefully managing her fuel and ammunition supplies. When the radar unit finally appeared in her targeting system, Sarah was ready. She rolled into a steep dive, lined up the shot, and fired. The round struck home just as the target disappeared behind cover again. "Outstanding, Hawkeye 1, range control announced. Perfect score. 12 targets destroyed with time and ammunition to spare." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction as she climbed back to altitude and turned toward home. She had flown a nearly perfect mission, but now came the waiting. In less than an hour, Jake Reynolds would take his turn, and she would learn whether her performance was good enough to win the challenge. Sarah landed her A-10 with the same precision she had shown during the exercise, touching down smoothly on the runway, despite the crosswind that had developed during her flight. As she taxied back to the parking area, she could see ground crews and fellow pilots gathered around the operations building, clearly waiting for news of her performance. The post-flight procedures seemed to take forever. Sarah completed her shutdown checklist methodically, ensuring that every system was properly secured before climbing down from the cockpit. Her crew chief, Staff Sergeant Williams, was waiting with a broad grin on his face. "How did it feel up there, Captain?" Williams asked as he began the post-flight inspection of the aircraft. "It felt good, Sergeant. Really good," Sarah replied, removing her helmet and running her fingers through her sweat-dampened hair. "The bird performed perfectly. Your maintenance crew did an outstanding job." Williams nodded with pride. The ground crews took personal ownership of their aircraft and felt responsible for every mission's success or failure. "We heard on the radio that you got all 12 targets. Is that right?" "That's right. Clean sweep with time and ammunition to spare." Word of Sarah's perfect score spread quickly through the gathered crowd. She could see the mixture of surprise and admiration on the faces of pilots who had flown the same course, and knew how challenging some of those targets could be. Even veteran pilots rarely achieved perfect scores on their first attempt at a new target layout. Colonel Harrison approached with a tablet displaying the preliminary scoring data. "Outstanding work, Captain. Perfect target destruction, excellent ammunition conservation, and textbook tactical execution. That's going to be a very difficult score to beat." Sarah felt a moment of satisfaction, but she knew the competition was only half over. Jake Reynolds still had his turn, and his reputation suggested he would not go down without a fight. "Thank you, sir. I'm looking forward to seeing how Major Reynolds performs." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Jake appeared from the operations building, already dressed in his flight gear and carrying his helmet. His expression was serious, and Sarah noticed that he avoided making eye contact with her as he walked toward his aircraft. The easy confidence he had displayed that morning seemed to have been replaced by something more focused and determined. "Major Reynolds," Colonel Harrison called out, "you've got a tough act to follow. Captain Mitchell just put up a perfect score." Jake stopped and turned back toward the group. "Perfect scores are impressive, Colonel, but they don't tell the whole story. Sometimes it's not just about hitting targets. It's about how you hit them and what kind of tactical decisions you make under pressure." Sarah raised an eyebrow at the comment. It sounded like Jake was already setting up excuses or looking for ways to diminish her performance. She remembered Master Sergeant Rodriguez's warning about technicalities and began to wonder what angle Jake might be planning. "The scoring system is the same for both pilots, Major," Harrison replied firmly. "Target destruction, ammunition efficiency, time management, and adherence to safety procedures. Those are the only factors that matter." Jake nodded but didn't look entirely satisfied with the response. He continued toward his aircraft, while Sarah and the other observers made their way to the operations building to watch his performance on the range monitoring system. The operations center had multiple displays showing real-time footage from cameras positioned throughout the practice range. Radar screens tracked aircraft positions and weapon impacts, while computer systems calculated scoring data based on target damage and ammunition expenditure. Sarah found herself studying every detail as Jake's A-10 appeared on the screens. "Razor 2 requesting permission for takeoff." Jake's voice came through the radio speakers. Sarah noticed that he had chosen a different call sign than expected, but that was within his rights as the mission commander. Jake's takeoff was smooth and professional. As his aircraft climbed away from the base and turned toward the practice range, Sarah watched his flight path on the radar display. He seemed to be taking a more direct route than she had chosen, which might save a few seconds but would also give him less time to study the target layout from above. "Range control, Razor 2 approaching target area. Request permission to begin exercise." "Razor 2, you are cleared hot. All targets reset and active." Sarah watched as Jake began his attack run on the first target. His approach was more aggressive than hers had been, coming in at a steeper angle and higher speed. The attack was successful, destroying the target with a precise burst of cannon fire. But Sarah noticed that he had used slightly more ammunition than necessary. The second target fell quickly as well. But again, Jake seemed to be favoring speed over efficiency. His time between targets was excellent, but his ammunition conservation was not quite as good as Sarah's had been. She began to wonder if he was trying to make up for some disadvantage by rushing through the course. By the fifth target, a pattern was becoming clear. Jake was flying aggressively and accurately, but his ammunition usage was higher than optimal. He was also taking more risks, flying at lower altitudes and making sharper turns that looked impressive, but increased his exposure to simulated threats. "He's burning through ammo pretty fast," observed Major Thompson, the weapons systems officer who was helping with the scoring. "If he keeps that up, he might run short before completing all the targets." Sarah said nothing, but she was thinking the same thing. The A-10's cannon carried a finite amount of ammunition, and managing that resource was a crucial part of any successful mission. In real combat, running out of ammunition could mean the difference between mission success and failure. Jake's performance continued to be impressive in terms of speed and accuracy, but his resource management was clearly inferior to Sarah's. By the time he reached the 8th target, he had used nearly as much ammunition as Sarah had used for all 12 targets. Then something unexpected happened. Jake's radio crackled with what sounded like a distress call from another aircraft. Sarah frowned, knowing that no other aircraft were scheduled to be in the area during the exercise. "Range control. This is Razor 2. I'm receiving a distress call from an aircraft requesting immediate assistance. Request permission to break off exercise and respond." Colonel Harrison immediately stepped forward to the radio console. "Razor 2, range control. There are no distress calls in this area. Continue with your exercise." There was a pause before Jake responded. "Roger, range control. Must have been interference from another frequency." Sarah felt her suspicions rising. The timing of the supposed distress call was very convenient, occurring just as Jake was falling behind in ammunition efficiency. She wondered if this was the kind of technicality or manipulation that Rodriguez had warned her about. Jake resumed his attack runs, but something had changed. His ammunition usage became much more conservative, and his tactics shifted to favor precision over speed. It was as if the brief interruption had allowed him to reset his approach and correct his earlier mistakes. The remainder of Jake's exercise unfolded with clinical precision. After the mysterious radio interruption, his flying seemed transformed. Where he had previously been wasteful with ammunition, he now placed his shots with surgical accuracy. His target engagement became more methodical, and his tactical decisions showed the kind of experience that came from years of combat flying. Sarah watched the displays with growing concern. Jake was clearly a skilled pilot, and his recovery from the early ammunition management problems was impressive. She began to worry that despite her perfect score, he might find a way to edge ahead in the overall evaluation. Excellent shot. Razor 2, came the confirmation from range control as Jake destroyed the 10th target. 2 targets remaining, 8 minutes on the clock. Sarah noticed that Colonel Harrison was studying the ammunition expenditure data with a frown. Major Thompson leaned over to point at something on the screen, and the 2 officers had a brief, quiet conversation that she couldn't overhear. Jake's approach to the 11th target was a masterpiece of tactical flying. He used the terrain and simulated threats to maximum advantage, demonstrating the kind of battlefield awareness that separated experienced combat pilots from those who had only flown training missions. His attack was flawless, destroying the target with minimal ammunition expenditure. The final target was the same mobile radar unit that had given Sarah her most challenging shot. Jake circled overhead, waiting for the optimal moment to strike. When the target finally appeared, his attack was perfectly timed and executed. The radar unit was destroyed, giving Jake a perfect score of 12 targets eliminated. Outstanding work, Razor 2, range control announced. All targets destroyed. Return to base. As Jake's aircraft disappeared from the radar screens, the operations center became busy with activity. Officers huddled around computer displays, analyzing performance data and calculating final scores. Sarah tried to read their expressions, but their professional demeanor gave nothing away. 20 minutes later, both pilots stood in the briefing room waiting for the results. Jake seemed confident, even cocky, while Sarah maintained her composure despite feeling nervous about the outcome. Colonel Harrison and Major Thompson entered carrying folders of data and wearing expressions that revealed nothing. Both pilots performed exceptionally well today. Harrison began. Perfect target destruction scores, excellent tactical execution, and professional conduct throughout the exercise. This was exactly the kind of flying we expect from our A-10 pilots. Sarah felt her heart sinking. The colonel's tone suggested that the results were very close, which meant Jake's late rally had probably been enough to overcome his early mistakes. However, Harrison continued, there are some significant differences in performance that need to be addressed. Captain Mitchell demonstrated superior ammunition conservation, more efficient time management, and better adherence to standard procedures throughout her flight. Jake shifted uncomfortably but remained silent. Major Reynolds showed excellent recovery skills and tactical adaptation, but his early ammunition usage was wasteful, and there are some questions about the radio transmission that interrupted his exercise. Sarah's attention sharpened. She had suspected something was wrong with that supposed distress call, and apparently the evaluators had noticed it too. Major Thompson, would you explain what we found during our analysis? Thompson stepped forward with a tablet displaying radio frequency data. During Major Reynolds's exercise, our monitoring systems recorded a radio transmission that appeared to come from his aircraft on the emergency frequency. The transmission lasted approximately 15 seconds and contained what sounded like a distress call from another aircraft. Jake's face remained impassive, but Sarah could see tension in his posture. However, Thompson continued, when we analyzed the transmission, we discovered that the audio was actually a recording played through Major Reynolds's radio system. There was no aircraft in distress, and the transmission was generated from within his cockpit. The briefing room fell silent. Sarah felt a surge of anger mixed with vindication. Her suspicions had been correct, and Jake had been caught cheating. Major Reynolds, Colonel Harrison said quietly. Do you have an explanation for this? Jake straightened his shoulders and looked directly at the colonel. Sir, I was testing my radio equipment during a lull in the exercise. I wanted to make sure my emergency communications were functioning properly. By playing a recording of a fake distress call? Sir, it was a training recording that I used to practice emergency response procedures. I didn't realize it would be transmitted on the emergency frequency. Harrison's expression made it clear that he wasn't buying the explanation. Major, that recording was played at a time when you were falling behind in ammunition efficiency. After the transmission ended, your performance improved dramatically. That suggests the interruption was deliberate and designed to give you time to reassess and adjust your tactics. That's a serious accusation. Sir, it's a serious situation, Major. What you did constitutes cheating, and it violates multiple regulations regarding radio procedures and exercise conduct. Sarah felt a mixture of emotions. She was vindicated in her suspicions, but she took no pleasure in seeing a fellow pilot's career potentially destroyed by poor judgment. Even though Jake had challenged her and treated her with disrespect, she hadn't wanted things to end this way. Sir, Jake said, I request that my performance be evaluated based solely on target destruction and tactical execution. The radio issue was a technical malfunction, not intentional misconduct. Harrison shook his head. Major, the evidence shows that the transmission was deliberately played through your radio system. There's no way this was accidental. You chose to cheat rather than accept the consequences of your early mistakes. The colonel turned to Sarah. Captain Mitchell, you flew an exemplary mission today. Perfect target destruction, optimal ammunition conservation, excellent time management, and absolute adherence to all procedures and regulations. You demonstrated exactly the kind of professionalism and skill we expect from our pilots. Sarah nodded, accepting the praise while feeling uncomfortable about the circumstances. She had wanted to win based on her flying skills, not because her opponent had been caught cheating. Major Reynolds, Harrison continued, you're grounded pending a full investigation into this incident. Your conduct today was unbecoming of an officer and potentially dangerous. Playing fake emergency transmissions could have interfered with real emergency situations. Jake's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Sir, this is ridiculous. One small technical issue doesn't invalidate my entire performance. I completed the mission successfully. Major, you compromised the integrity of the exercise and violated regulations. That's not a small technical issue. That's a serious breach of military conduct. Word of the investigation spread through the base within hours. The military operated on a foundation of trust and integrity, and when an officer was accused of cheating, it became a matter of serious concern for everyone involved. Sarah found herself at the center of unwanted attention as pilots and support staff sought details about what had happened during the exercise. She tried to maintain her normal routine, but the situation was unavoidable. During dinner at the officers' mess, conversations stopped when she entered the room. Some pilots offered congratulations on her performance, while others seemed uncomfortable discussing the matter at all. The whole incident had created an atmosphere of tension that affected the entire squadron. Master Sergeant Rodriguez found Sarah in the maintenance hangar the next morning, where she was reviewing technical manuals to distract herself from the ongoing drama. Captain, I wanted to thank you for handling yesterday's situation with such professionalism, he said quietly. A lot of pilots might have made a big scene when they realized what was happening. Sarah looked up from her manual. I didn't want to win that way, Sergeant. I wanted to prove my abilities through fair competition. Ma'am, you did prove your abilities. That was some of the finest flying I've seen in my 20 years on this base. Major Reynolds' cheating doesn't change the fact that you flew a perfect mission. Rodriguez paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. I've worked with a lot of pilots over the years, and I can usually tell who has the right stuff and who's just pretending. You've got it, Captain. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The investigation proceeded quickly under Colonel Harrison's direct supervision. Military investigators reviewed radio recordings, aircraft telemetry data, and interviewed everyone who had been present during the exercise. Jake remained grounded and was largely avoiding contact with other personnel, which only added to the tension around the base. 3 days after the exercise, Sarah was called to Colonel Harrison's office. She found him reviewing a thick folder of documents, his expression serious but not hostile. Captain Mitchell, please have a seat. I wanted to discuss the results of our investigation and what this means for you going forward. Sarah settled into the chair across from his desk, uncertain about what was coming next. Yes, sir. First, let me say that your performance during the exercise was exemplary. The investigation has confirmed that you flew by the book and achieved your results through skill and preparation alone. There's no question about the legitimacy of your success. Harrison closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. Major Reynolds has admitted to deliberately playing the fake distress call. He claims it was a moment of poor judgment when he realized he was falling behind, but the evidence suggests this was a premeditated action. He had the recording equipment prepared and ready to use. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and sadness. She was glad that the truth had come out, but she felt sorry for Jake despite his poor treatment of her. Military careers could be destroyed by incidents like this, and she knew the consequences would follow him for years. What happens to Major Reynolds now, sir? He's being transferred to another base and will face disciplinary action. The exact nature of that action will be determined by his new commanding officer, but his career prospects have been significantly damaged. This kind of incident stays in an officer's permanent record. Harrison picked up another document from his desk. Which brings me to why I called you here. Your performance during this exercise, combined with your overall record, has caught the attention of some very important people. Sarah's pulse quickened. Important people, sir? The Pentagon is looking for experienced A-10 pilots for a special assignment. It's a training role that would involve working with new pilot candidates and developing improved combat tactics. Your name has been submitted for consideration. The opportunity sounded incredible, but Sarah was cautious about appearing too eager. What would this assignment involve, sir? You'd be working with the Air Force's top tactical development team. The A-10 is being upgraded with new systems and weapons, and they need pilots who understand the aircraft's capabilities to help design training programs for the next generation of Warthog pilots. Harrison handed her the document. This is an opportunity that could define your career, Captain. The officers who work on these development teams often go on to senior leadership positions. It's exactly the kind of assignment that leads to squadron command and beyond. Sarah scanned the document, trying to absorb the implications. A Pentagon assignment would mean leaving combat operations behind, at least temporarily, but it could open doors that might otherwise remain closed throughout her career. Sir, I'm honored to be considered for this position. When would I need to make a decision? They want an answer within 2 weeks. The assignment would begin in 3 months, which would give you time to complete your current rotation and transition your responsibilities to another pilot. As Sarah left the colonel's office, her mind was racing with possibilities. The confrontation with Jake Reynolds had started as a challenge to her abilities, but it had ended up showcasing her skills in a way that could change her entire career trajectory. The irony wasn't lost on her that his attempt to undermine her had actually resulted in her receiving recognition and opportunities that might never have come otherwise. That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters reviewing the Pentagon assignment details. The work sounded fascinating and the career benefits were obvious, but she would miss the direct connection to combat operations that made A-10 flying so meaningful. She thought about the soldiers on the ground who depended on close air support and wondered if leaving that mission behind was the right choice. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed her father's number, and she realized she hadn't spoken to her family since before the exercise. Hi, Dad. Sarah, I heard through the grapevine that you've been making waves out there. Something about showing up a hotshot pilot who thought women couldn't fly combat missions. Sarah laughed despite herself. Military news traveled fast, and her father still had connections throughout the Air Force community. It wasn't quite that dramatic, Dad, but I did have a good day in the cockpit. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Your mother and I always knew you had what it takes to succeed in this business. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong up there. The conversation with her father reminded Sarah of why she had chosen this career path in the first place. She hadn't become a pilot to advance her career or work at the Pentagon. She had become a pilot because she loved flying and wanted to serve her country in a meaningful way. 2 weeks later, Sarah made her decision. She would accept the Pentagon assignment, but with conditions. She requested that the position include regular deployments back to combat operations, ensuring that she maintained her connection to the mission that had drawn her to the A-10 in the first place. The request was unusual, but her performance and the circumstances that brought her to their attention gave her negotiating power that few junior officers possessed. The morning of Jake Reynolds' departure from the base was awkward for everyone involved. He had maintained a low profile during his final weeks, avoiding contact with most personnel and focusing on the administrative requirements of his transfer. Sarah happened to encounter him in the parking lot as he loaded his personal belongings into his car. "Captain Mitchell," he said, his voice lacking the arrogance that had characterized their first meeting. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior during our competition. What I did was wrong, and it reflected poorly on the entire squadron." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity or continued hostility. What she saw was genuine remorse mixed with embarrassment. "Major Reynolds, I accept your apology. I hope you're able to rebuild your career and move past this incident." Jake nodded, seeming surprised by her gracious response. "For what it's worth, your flying that day was exceptional. You earned your victory fair and square, and I should have acknowledged that instead of trying to cheat my way to a better score. We all make mistakes. Major, the important thing is learning from them and doing better going forward." They shook hands and Jake drove away from Bagram Air Base, leaving behind a cautionary tale about the consequences of letting pride and prejudice override professionalism and integrity. Sarah's final months at the base passed quickly. Her reputation as an exceptional pilot had been enhanced by the competition incident, and she found herself serving as an unofficial mentor to newer pilots arriving in the squadron. She took particular satisfaction in working with the handful of female pilots who joined their ranks, helping them navigate the challenges that came with being minorities in a male-dominated profession. The Pentagon assignment proved to be everything she had hoped for and more. Working with the tactical development team gave her insights into the future of close air support operations and allowed her to influence training programs that would shape the next generation of A-10 pilots. Her regular deployments back to combat zones kept her skills sharp and maintained her connection to the mission. 3 years later, Sarah was promoted to major and given command of her own A-10 squadron. The promotion ceremony was held at the same base where her confrontation with Jake Reynolds had taken place, bringing her career full circle. Colonel Harrison, now promoted to Brigadier General, delivered the keynote address. "Major Mitchell represents the best qualities of Air Force leadership," he told the gathered audience. "She has demonstrated repeatedly that excellence comes from skill, preparation, and integrity, not from politics or manipulation. Her commitment to developing other pilots and advancing our tactical capabilities has made our entire force stronger." As Sarah accepted her new squadron guidon, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The challenge from Jake Reynolds had been intended to undermine her confidence and question her abilities. Instead, it had become a defining moment that showcased her skills and opened doors to opportunities she might never have received otherwise. Her squadron included both male and female pilots, and Sarah made sure that performance was the only criterion that mattered for assignments and advancement. She established a culture of mutual respect and professional excellence that became a model for other units throughout the Air Force. During her first squadron briefing as commander, Sarah addressed the lessons she had learned from her own experiences. "Excellence is not about proving that you're better than someone else," she told her pilots. "Excellence is about being the best pilot you can be and helping your wingmen be the best pilots they can be. We succeed or fail as a team, and every person in this squadron has earned their place here through merit and dedication." One of the new pilots, a young woman fresh from training, approached Sarah after the briefing. "Ma'am, I've heard stories about your competition with Major Reynolds. Is it true that he tried to cheat because he didn't think women could fly as well as men?" Sarah considered her response carefully. The story had become something of a legend within the A-10 community, growing more dramatic with each retelling. She wanted to be honest about what had happened while focusing on the positive lessons rather than dwelling on Jake's failures. "Lieutenant, what's true is that I was challenged to prove my abilities, and I responded by flying the best mission of my career up to that point. The other pilot made some poor decisions that hurt his own reputation and career. The lesson isn't about gender or prejudice. It's about the importance of integrity and professionalism in everything we do." Sarah paused, looking out at the flight line where a row of A-10 Thunderbolts sat ready for their next mission. "In this business, your reputation is built one flight at a time. Every time you strap into that cockpit, you have the opportunity to prove that you belong there. Don't waste time worrying about what other people think about your qualifications. Focus on being so good at your job that their opinions become irrelevant. As the young pilot walked away with a thoughtful expression, Sarah reflected on how much her own perspective had evolved since that confrontational morning 3 years earlier. She had learned that true victory came not from defeating opponents, but from excelling at her chosen profession and helping others do the same. The A-10 Thunderbolt II continued to serve as the backbone of American close air support operations, and Sarah Mitchell continued to serve as one of its most skilled and respected pilots. Her career had been shaped by a moment of challenge and adversity, but she had transformed that challenge into an opportunity for growth and achievement. The thunder of A-10 engines taking off for training missions filled the afternoon air, a sound that never failed to stir Sarah's passion for flying. She had proven that she belonged in the cockpit of the Warthog, not through arguments or politics, but through the pure demonstration of skill and professionalism when it mattered most. That lesson would guide her throughout the rest of her military career and beyond.